Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. Here are today's top stories. Michael Bloomberg is out of the presidential race. Now he's endorsing former Vice President Joe Biden's bid for the nomination. President Trump says it's still safe to fly. He met with airline CEOs today and reminded the public that the number of U.S. coronavirus infections remains low. U.S. lawmakers are coming together to help combat the coronavirus. They struck an $8.3 billion bipartisan deal today to fund the country's preventative measures and treatment options. The money is considered emergency funding. China is now testing lung transplantation as a potential treatment for coronavirus patients, but many questions surrounding the procedures remain unanswered. And the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency is a divisive topic nowadays. We ride along with its officers for a closer look at their day-to-day operations. The richest person ever to run for president of the United States dropping out of the race today. Media mogul and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg is calling it quits after finishing well behind on Super Tuesday.
The biggest self-funded campaign for president in American history came to an end on Wednesday when former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, withdrew from the Democratic presidential race.
Mike Bloomberg started.
The billionaire paid out of his own pocket over $550 million worth of ads during his 3-month-long campaign.
Creating tens of thousands.
No campaign has ever accomplished as much as you did in such a short period of time.
After a lackluster performance at the polls on Super Tuesday, Bloomberg decided to leave the race. Bloomberg thrust his support behind a moderate candidate who he says has the best chance at winning the election.
And I'm glad to say I endorse Joe Biden, and I hope you will join me in working to make him the next president of the United States of America.
Bloomberg entered the race too late to compete in early voting states, so his campaign hinged on winning big on Super Tuesday. But as results came in, it was clear he only won the U.S.'s South Pacific territory, American Samoa.
I knew what this race would be all about. I knew we didn't have much of a chance, but we did it anyways.
With Bloomberg dropping out, there are only 4 Democratic candidates still in the race, one of whom will go up against the Republican shoo-in, President Trump, in November.
And Biden and Sanders are now the favorites. Down from more than half a dozen candidates a week ago, some say it's now a 2-horse race. They both have a different campaign style and different demographic support.
A resurgent Joe Biden scored victories from Texas to Massachusetts on Super Tuesday. Just days earlier, his presidential bid was teetering on the edge of disaster. But his rival, Bernie Sanders, seized the biggest prize with a win in California.
Biden's ability to demonstrate widespread support among the Democratic electorate across the country was a huge boost for his campaign. It was also a significant night for Bernie Sanders as well.
Biden's victories were powered by Democratic voters who broke his way just days before casting their ballots, a wave of late momentum that scrambled the race in a matter of hours. Former Democratic contenders dropping out, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, and backing Biden, certainly helped him on the day. The Democratic Party's nominating field is down to almost a 2-man contest, Biden versus Sanders. Both lifelong politicians with starkly different visions for America's future.
Sanders definitely has the advantage when it comes to organization and grassroots support. Biden has sort of the wind in his sails right now.
Super Tuesday marked the most significant day of voting in the party's 2020 presidential nomination run. It could take weeks or months for one to be picked to take on President Trump in the November general election.
The House Homeland Security Committee has requested U.S. Secret Service protection for major Democratic presidential candidates. The committee says Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders meet the criteria. They are the current frontrunners. The protection is requested through the end of their campaigns. The call comes after 2 anti-dairy protesters rushed the stage at a Biden rally in Los Angeles Tuesday night. And President Trump today reassuring Americans that it's still safe to fly. He met with airline CEOs who said passengers and crew safety is their top priority. They're also understanding of any passengers who wish to change or cancel upcoming flights.
President Trump met with airline leaders today to discuss the coronavirus. After the meeting, the president reassured Americans that air travel is safe.
It's safe to fly, and large portions of the world are very safe to fly.
He said the government has already begun blocking or screening people flying from unsafe countries. The Department of Homeland Security has so far screened 53,000 people and blocked several from entering.
We have closed down certain sections of the world, frankly.
Trump says this response has kept the number of U.S. infections low. The total now stands at around 120 as of Wednesday afternoon. That includes 46 Americans evacuated together from the Diamond Princess cruise ship in Japan.
If you don't add that to the numbers, we're talking about very small numbers in the United States.
Despite the relatively low numbers, airlines aren't taking any chances. Alaska Airlines telling the president that they have revised cleaning routines, established 3 levels of onboard cleaning, and increased cleaning intensity.
I think I was very reassured to hear the airlines talk about their cleaning procedures.
When asked if the government would give financial relief to airlines if people stopped flying, the president said they hadn't discussed it.
Lawmakers struck a bipartisan deal today and are set to dip into the government's pocketbook to help fight the coronavirus. They agreed on more than $8 billion in emergency funding.
The government has agreed on a dollar amount to fund preventative efforts and treatment options for the coronavirus, $8.3 billion. The majority of the funds, 85%, will be sent domestically. Senate Appropriations Committee Chairman Richard Shelby announced the move on Wednesday. He explained that it's not a political matter, but a public safety concern. The emergency funding package was clinched as officials from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported well over 100 virus cases inside U.S. borders. 9 deaths have been reported so far, all of them in Washington state. Local officials are struggling to contain a mini outbreak, mainly centered around a nursing home in King County. The $8.3 billion proposal is more than triple the $2.5 billion that the White House originally asked for. After the administration's initial request, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer responded with an $8.5 billion proposal. He said that he had expected a $7 to $8 billion proposal. President Trump has said that he'd be happy if lawmakers were willing to propose $8.5 billion. The bill will first need to pass the House and the Senate before it is signed into law by President Trump.
ICE has been criticized by some as being cruel, with others even wanting to abolish it. So we decided to follow LA's Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents for a day. NTD's Los Angeles correspondent Zach Lee reports.
What does a day in the life of an ICE officer look like? Around 5 a.m., officers are briefed about the operation. Then they head towards the planned location to wait for the targeted criminal to show up.
Right. So these operations, these are our fugitive operations, right? Targeted enforcement operations. We do this every day, basically 365 days per year. So
Officer Marin says they only do operations to remove criminals who pose a threat to the communities. Raids and sweeps is not the right idea.
Restaurants, we don't do anything like that and do area control or what people term as sweeps or raids or anything like that. We definitely don't do that. These are targeted enforcement operations. 2
criminals are the targets for the day. One, a convicted sex offender, and the other convicted of assault with a deadly weapon and multiple DUIs, who had already been deported 4 times previously. After their arrest, they are taken back to a temporary detention center, then fingerprinted and sent to a holding room, where they can make phone calls and have 1 visitation.
Where there's restrooms, where there's phones, where they have an opportunity to speak with a consulate officer if they'd like. And like I said, they'll be here for no more than 12 hours, and then they're either going to be removed or they're going to be taken to our long-term detention center up in Adelanto, California.
In sanctuary cities like Los Angeles, removing criminal illegal immigrants takes quite an effort compared to before the sanctuary policies were enacted.
So one officer working at a jail could process anywhere from 8 to 12 individuals during their 8-hour shift, right? So what you saw today was that you saw 10 officers spending about 5 hours to arrest 2 people. So
right now, 10 states have sanctuary policies in their counties or cities, which means that after a criminal who is illegally living in the U.S. is arrested by local officers, they're usually released back into the community.
And it's unfortunate that, because again, I think it's politicians and even some law enforcement leaders putting politics ahead of public safety.
Reporting by Zach Lee and Melina Weiskup, NTD News, Los Angeles.
Still to come, China is now using lung transplants to potentially combat the coronavirus. But where are the organs coming from? Learn more about why an expert is questioning the practice when we return.
Absolutely the #1 show on the planet.
I love it.
Breathtaking.
Incredible.
Awesome.
Very exciting.
Mesmerizing. Really enjoyed it.
It makes you feel alive.
Absolutely flawless.
I laughed, I cried. Colorful and vibrant and joyous.
The dancers, you guys are amazing.
They can just fly. Gravity does not apply to them.
Oh my gosh, I was so intrigued by this.
I'd get lost in the music and I'd get lost in what I'm seeing on stage.
It's a very eye-opening experience.
We came for her birthday.
Great experience, well worth it.
Even though it's been going for about 10 years, every year it's a completely different show.
I know this sold out very, very quickly, and I can see why now.
I think I've not seen something like this ever before.
I would recommend it to everybody.
I recommend it to everyone.
As coronavirus cases continue to crop up around the world, some are wondering about the virus itself. A new study has found the coronavirus can mutate. Our reporter Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
A new study published in the National Science Review titled On the Origin and Continuing Evolution of SARS-CoV-2 found that the novel coronavirus can mutate. These viruses evolved into two major types called L and S. These two have different potency. The study found the L type was more common at 70%, while the S type was at 30%. But the S type was found to be the older version. And while the L type showed up more in the early stages of the outbreak in Wuhan, it started declining after early January 2020, while the S-type, which is less aggressive, could have been increasing since then. The National Health Committee of China released the 7th edition of its trial treatment program for the novel coronavirus, adding a pathological change section. The new section states the virus can infect the lungs, spleen, lymph and bone marrow, heart, blood vessels, liver and gall, kidney, and other organs. And a hospital in Beijing said on Wednesday a 56-year-old patient was confirmed to have the coronavirus, adding the virus had infected his central nervous system. The patient has already been discharged. There have been multiple cases of neurocoronavirus damage to the nervous system. In a clinical study published in medical platform medRxiv, which publishes papers that have not yet been peer-reviewed, a team of doctors in China studied 214 coronavirus patients and found that more than 30% had neurological symptoms. And public outrage on how a top-level Chinese official has been handling the outbreak. A Beijing citizen, Xue Fuming, at high risk to himself, reported online with his real name and identity card number. He criticized Wang Huning, a member of the Politburo Standing Committee, which is the highest level of leadership in the Chinese regime and is responsible for the propaganda efforts and ideology in China. In his criticism, the citizen called out Wang, saying he disregarded human life and lacks a basic conscience, saying he does not consider how to fight against the epidemic. Instead, he oversaw the publication of the book, A Battle Against Epidemic, China Combating COVID-19 in 2020, and also the state-run media People's Daily published an article on the front page titled, Our Time Passes Sweeter Than Honey.
To find a cure for the coronavirus, doctors in China are experimenting with a new form of treatment, lung transplants. But the operations are raising questions about how ethical the practice really is. NTD's Penny Zhou has more.
Over the past weekend, China's state media reported that 2 COVID-19 patients are in stable conditions after going through lung transplant surgeries. The patients, one 59-year-old male and one 66-year-old female, are both critically sickened by the infection and have irreversible lung damages. Both were on life support or ECMO before the transplants. Looking at the timeline of the transplant process, some medical experts say it's incredible how quickly the hospitals found matching organs. According to Chinese media report, in the first case, doctors made the decision to conduct the transplant on February 24th, and the donation and transplant happened just 5 days after, on February 29th. The process for the second patient showed a similar high speed. By comparison, in New York, most patients wait for 10 to 14 months for a replacement lung to become available. Chinese state media claimed that the organs come from brain-dead donors, but did not offer details of their identity.
How old are the donors? What kinds of diseases do they have? What causes brain death? This is information that should be readily available, but the authorities didn't offer any information about it. They just said 2 brain-dead people donated their lungs, and they were able to do these emergency transplants. This is really abnormal.
For him, the sheer speed China was able to find organs for 2 consecutive cases is incredible.
We know that most brain-dead organs come from victims of traffic accidents. But the problem is, recently we know there are barely any people on the streets in China, nor are there many cars. So the chances of brain death due to car accidents should be extremely low right now. Then how are they able to get matching organs so quickly?
The main surgeon who operated the first transplant, Chen Jingyu, said that if the experiment turns out successful, they will conduct more transplants for coronavirus patients. In an interview with state media, Chen said they will consider all Wuhan patients with critical conditions and select some to get lung transplants. Such a promise raises ethical questions about the source of the organs, given China's record on organ transplants. Last year, an independent People's Tribunal in London delivered a judgment
that in China, forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience has been practiced for a substantial period of time, involving a very substantial number of victims.
Besides questions about the donor, an infectious disease expert says how helpful this is for the patient is also in question. Microbiologist Sean Lin said even though the patients tested negative before their operations, their bodies may not be clean of the virus, making it possible for the new organs to get infected.
That's why I think it's just totally against common sense.
Lin said to do this kind of transplant, doctors have to suppress the patient's immune system so the body will accept the foreign organ.
So you're suppressing people's immune at the same time, but people need to fight with the virus too, right? So how do you work on this together? And so that's why you putting the patient in higher risk that he may have a relapse of the COVID-19, even if he's on the track of recovery, and you actually give the patient extra suffering in this process. I don't even know if the patient's family really agree on this.
The operation also puts the medical staff at huge risk and possible exposure to the virus in the patient's body. So why did China coordinate so much resource to conduct the transplant and publicize it with state media?
From the news stories we can see, the whole operation is supported by local health authorities. They bypassed all medical paperwork and procedures and put everything they have into it. So when I read the news, my feeling is it's almost like propaganda organized by the Communist Party. The storyline is how the Communist Party is leading China to fight the disease.
Chinese authorities are facing a growing crisis over their handling of the coronavirus. Experts say its cover-up in the early stage and silencing of whistleblowers had put the party's legitimacy in question for the Chinese people. Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Coming up, a school in the UK is teaching students a new way to shake hands, now using their feet. Find out why they're changing the popular greeting after the break.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people. I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
Are you tired of newspapers spinning the truth and pushing false narratives? And are you looking for honest coverage of Spygate, the true story of collusion? Or the truth behind the crisis at our southern border? Or how the Chinese Communist Party is working to subvert America and our way of life, then you need to check out the Epoch Times newspaper. It's independent, nonpartisan, and it doesn't push any political agendas. Just go to readepoch.com and try it yourself for a full month for just $1. You'll absolutely love it.
An industry body said today that African Airlines are facing a hit of up to $40 million from the coronavirus outbreak.
The coronavirus epidemic could cost African Airlines tens of millions of dollars in revenue this year, a global industry body has said, in a potentially devastating hit to often struggling airlines that count on lucrative Chinese routes to fund their expansion. Airlines around the world have suspended or modified flights amid the outbreak, which began in mainland China at the end of last year and has now spread to more than 60 countries worldwide. The global cost to the aviation industry is projected to be $29 billion this year, the International Air Transport Association has said. And at a conference in Addis Ababa on Wednesday, the organisation's special envoy to Africa said African airlines face a hit of as much as $40 million. The IATA had already forecast before the outbreak that African airlines would make a loss of around $200 million this year. Tewolde Gebre-Mariam, chief executive of the continent's biggest carrier, Ethiopia Airlines, said the company had seen air travel demand decline by 20%. His airline has faced criticism online for not cancelling flights to China, as Kenya, Tanzania and Rwanda have done. On Tuesday, Kenya also halted direct flights from 2 cities in northern Italy, the location of the biggest cluster of coronavirus cases in Europe.
And in his latest urban climbing stunt, French Spiderman scaled a Spanish skyscraper. He said the climb was symbolic, a message to people afraid of the viral outbreak.
The Torre Glorias in Spain is 38 stories high, but French Spiderman went up without a harness. However, he didn't make this climb for fun. Alain Robert said he noticed people panicking over the novel coronavirus, so he wanted to give them a message.
And then people, they start to get a little bit crazy. And actually, fear is even more contagious than the disease itself.
French Spiderman is known for his life-threatening urban climbing stunts, but this doesn't mean he isn't afraid to go up. He said he has to control his fear, and that's where his message lies.
So, most of all, avoiding panicking, because they are destroying their life. Do you think that it is nice living with that climate of fear?
Robert was arrested after coming down. He says he has suffered serious injuries from falls, but calls climbing his passion as well as his philosophy for life. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
UK school pupils practiced a foot-to-foot handshake today as a way to help stop spreading the coronavirus.
Children at St. Christopher's School in the English city of Hove were filmed in the playground practicing what is becoming known on social media as the Wuhan Shake. Chris Holt, St. Christopher's Director of Marketing and Communications, said the school is exploring ways to greet friends, teachers, and other adults without shaking hands and risking the spread of the virus. It comes as the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Britain leaped from 51 to 85 on Wednesday. It marks the biggest daily jump since the infection was first detected in the country.
Up next, the world's largest cheese contest is underway with a record number of entries. But not everyone can attend. Find out who can't come and why when we return.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
With just seconds to spare, New State Jersey troopers pulled a driver from a burning tractor trailer before it exploded on Monday. Trooper Robert Tarleton was in the middle of a traffic stop on the interstate when he says the big rig went off the road and burst into flames. He drove over and ran to the truck's cab. State Police Lieutenant Edward Ryder was already there, and the two officers pulled the driver to safety moments before the big rig exploded. The driver was hospitalized for evaluation with minor injuries. And the biennial World Championship Cheese Contest is underway in Wisconsin. But one judge from Japan can't attend because of the coronavirus.
This is the world's largest cheese competition. And yogurt and butter and dry dairy ingredients. Really, it's a full-blown dairy competition.
With a record number of over 3,500 entries from 26 nations around the world's largest cheese competition started Tuesday in Wisconsin. The 55 judges are cheese experts. They taste, sniff, and inspect more than 130 classes of dairy products.
So I'm pulling the plug up to get a good smell. Sometimes that gives you the best indication of what the cheese is going to taste like. It kind of whispers its secrets to you.
Judges include cheese graders, cheese buyers, dairy science professors, and researchers from 19 nations and 14 states. One judge and 30 people from a Japanese university could not attend as a result of travel restrictions due to coronavirus. There will be extra hand washing stations and hand sanitizers for judges as a precaution, but the virus is not expected to affect the competition otherwise. This year's winner will be announced Thursday.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.